What celebrity death hit you the hardest? Mr. Rogers. As a kid growing up in Pittsburgh, so many of my afternoons were spent exploring a new world with him. I had a friend in college that I talked to after Mr. Rogers had passed, and he had said that when he and his brother were sad they both watched his show because it felt like somebody loved them. It was also such an awful, insulting end for such a brilliant mind. His utter rage at what was happening to him, and there was nothing he could do about it, was so damn painful. He did some really emotional interviews on UK TV. One I really remember was one he did to raise awareness on Alzheimer's on C4 News, where you could tell he was just brought to tears at not being able to communicate how he used to. Then a year after he passed, there was a memorial show for him where Neil Gaiman started crying, saying he just wanted his friend back, and it broke me. I still haven't read The Shepherd's Crown, because then when I do there'll be no more Discworld books left to read. Uneasy face. Douglas Adams, author of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I was kind of a weird kid, had trouble connecting with people. Then I read Hitchhiker's Guide when I was 12-year-old, and it was like a light switching on. The strange twisting logic, the absurdism, the silly/cynical ridiculousness of it all, it felt like, for the first time, I had found a worldview and perspective I could relate to. Douglas Adams became this almost mythical figure to me, this strange, distant person I could finally connect with. I desperately wanted to meet him, to be his friend. Then I learned that, a year before I'd even started the books, he'd died. It honestly crushed me. It felt I'd lost my best friend. I mourned him, and mourned the imagined relationship I could have had with him. Looking back, it was obviously a parasocial relationship, and my fantasies about this 50-year-old British author becoming buddies with a 12-year-old kid living in the US were nonsense, but I still felt it acutely at the time. I feel like if Bourdain got the right help, he could have had a happy life. Depression is a tricky disease and can be fatal. For some people, you can try all the different types of therapies and medications and work extremely hard, but it still takes you in the end. For some people there is no right help, at least not yet. There are promising studies being done with psychedelics and other types of drugs and with magnetic stimulation on parts of the brain to help with treatment-resistant depression, but it's a lifelong struggle for many of us who suffer with depression. We do our best to fight this disease, knowing that it might still kill us in the end. Think of it like cancer, or something similar. You can get all the possible treatments and try everything available to get rid of it, but for some people, it won't completely go away and it ends up killing you. Unfortunately, Anthony Bourdain was one of those people. I shared my story in my own comment, but just so people can know the magic that was this man. Robin Williams. I've told this story on other accounts, but I love telling it. As a kid, I was one of 10 winners for a sweepstakes to be a pen pal with Robin for a year. I was stoked, and I'm like 8 or 9 years old. My brother and sister told me it probably wasn't going to be him, just a publicist or intern. I didn't care. For months we sent so many letters of silliness. All his letters were long, and he really loved talking about Zelda, she's a little older than me, and all the new projects he was working on. My family went to Disney that summer, and I wrote a letter while in the car, and I was determined to give it to Genie because I was convinced he was always playing him in the costume and wanted to hand deliver at least one. My brother and sister were again deterring me, but I wasn't breaking my gait. Well, of all coincidences in the world, Robin actually was there signing autographs. I was ecstatic. Literally jumping for joy as I'm in line. We get to him and I'm rambling like a motherfucker, telling him how I was a winner and about the letter and yada yada. He just goes Kyle. With a massive grin, and opens his coat and pulls out my letter from a month prior that was with a few others. Apparently he kept all our letters on him while on the road to help cheer himself up, which devastates me now thinking about what that meant. I almost fainted. I cannot express the amount of electric energy surging through me knowing Robin Williams actually wrote me, knew me, and I believe truly loved me and those other kids like Mac Miller is someone I grew up with, truly. During high school he was releasing party music and probably his poppiest music, so I didn't really enjoy his music as much but did hear his stuff. He did watching movies in 2013 when I graduated and I was all in. Truly someone with incredible artistry, and what is a crazy cosmic coincidence, had a lot of music that comforted me and related a lot to my life. He did Faces when I was getting into more serious drug use, he was sobering up when I moved to a new city and was basically clean, he released Divine Feminine when I was falling in love, and Swimming whenever I was still recovering from the breakup. I was absolutely crushed when he died, it felt like losing a distant friend. I still have a hard time listening to his music. Oh man, I was thinking about him just a couple hours ago. I can confidently say the LP has been a part of my life, basically since birth. My brothers listen to the band non-stop, they're the goats for introing me to the genre in general. As I grew up, I became progressively more attached to the group and their separate projects as well, Stone Temple Pilots, Dead by Sunrise, Fort Minor. One of my dreams was to see the band perform live, which unfortunately never ended up happening. I still remember exactly where I was and how I found out when Chester passed. Down to the gut-sinking feeling I had as I realized that that was it. Linkin Park as we knew it would never exist again. It was one of those moments where reality strikes and you become aware of how fragile our mortality is. Avicii died from something I narrowly avoided myself, really hit the nail home just how close I had come to biting it. It was sad he did, like, no doubt, but something about seeing literally what I not long suffered from and somebody else rich and famous, and it took months to get back to almost normal, really made me stick to staying sober. 3 years baby. I apparently caught it just in time and he did not. Shitty. By the way, if you are an alcoholic and get abdominal pain so intense you can't function, like curled up in agony on the floor, and can't eat or drink, go to the hospital. You might save your life. Edit/NB, don't be ashamed, the doctors are there to help not judge even though it feels like they are. The NHS saved my life as a result of my own idiocy and even smiled while doing it. They gave me support, help, and more importantly medicine to undo years of grief and self-harm from boozing. You can thank them for this comment and my edits. Robin Williams. His death rocked me to my core. It felt like losing a member of my family. I grew up watching his stand-ups, his TV shows and movies, everything he did, I loved. I introduced my kids to Aladdin, Mrs. Doubtfire, and Hook as soon as they were old enough to watch them. The day he died, I'll always remember where I was and what I was doing when I heard. How I sat in my car and cried right after. I'm not someone who idolizes celebrities or anything like that, in fact, I distinctly remember sitting in my car, crying, and saying, "What the hell is wrong with me?" out loud. But it just hit me that hard. I don't know, man, he just made me happy. His smile made me feel better during a tumultuous childhood. So I mourned his loss like no other. Rest in peace, Robin. You didn't know me, but I can't thank you enough for making my life better and brighter, just by being yourself. Professional wrestler Brody Lee/Luke Harper/John Huber died last year out of nowhere, seemingly, to us fans. Turns out he had been in the hospital for a few months, after taking time off for an unrelated injury. He died the day after Christmas of a non-COVID related lung disease that I don't think they ever really disclosed. This is probably the most shocking death in the wrestling community since Eddie Guerrero 15 years ago. He was seemingly fit and healthy, in his prime, and then suddenly he was gone. By all accounts he was an amazing person that prioritized his family above all else, was friends with and helped everyone he came across, and nobody had a single bad word to say about him. His family wanted to keep his illness private while he was alive, and shockingly in an industry that suffers greatly from unprofessional journalism and gossip, it was, so to everyone except the select few that knew, it was a complete shock. 6 months later and it still feels miserable to think about. I've never felt this upset about a famous person dying before. Even the polls of Chester dying was incredibly sad, but this hit on another level. He left behind a wife and 2 small children, 8 and 3 or 4 years old. The last company he worked for, AEW, keep his oldest son involved backstage and occasionally on TV as a way to help him cope with the loss of his father and essentially become a second family to him and his mother and brother. His mother has confirmed this. The kid absolutely adores wrestling, so while he unfortunately misses out on growing up with a father, he gets to live his best possible life. Rip Brody. Agreed. I mostly knew TB for his work on StarCraft 2, where he came into the commentating scene as a nobody. Most other esports commentators in SC2 were StarCraft, Brood War veterans, but managed to work his way up. Both through basic hard work and by supporting the scene as a whole. And all the while he had to fight his cancer. In 2017, he was invited as part of the commentating team for the SC2 World Championship at BlizzCon. His cancer had stopped progressing, or so it seemed, at the time. I was fortunate to attend that BlizzCon in person, so after the grand finals I walked up to where the commentators were hanging out and I shook his hand and told him that I thought it was great having him be part of the BlizzCon event and that I hoped he would be there again the next year. He said that he hoped so too. Not too long after, he posted that his cancer had taken a turn for the worse and in the spring of 2018 he passed away. That news stopped me dead in my tracks for a while. Didn't help that he was about the same age as me. Edit, Jeff Eincontrol L. Robinson was there too. He insisted on having a little chat with everyone who walked up to him to say hi. Very nice guy. Similar age as well. Died 2 years ago. I was looking for him in here. I loved watching his streams. It was heartbreaking to see what was happening. I'm not one to watch streams, I find them boring, but Etik's streams were so entertaining to watch. They were energetic, the guy was genuine, had a great personality and was a performer at heart. I didn't watch his last streams since he started uploading them in some other website that wasn't YouTube, but looking back at those last streams is disheartening. You could clearly see him putting up an act. He didn't seem genuine, he didn't seem to have fun like before. He was trying to make the streams work even after his manic episode while being spammed with clown emojis. It proved to be too much for him. Reading his suicide note is depressing. He genuinely thought of himself as a clown in the end. He felt like there was no turning back and it's a shame. He is truly missed. I'm sure he would have been one of the biggest streamers if he was still with us. Rest on peace Etika, Joykin boys for life. Robin Williams. I've told this story on other accounts but I love telling it. As a kid I was one of 10 winners for a sweepstakes to be a pen pal with Robin for a year. I was stoked and I'm like 8 or 9 years old. My brother and sister told me it probably wasn't going to be him, just a publicist or intern. I didn't care. For months we sent so many letters of silliness. All his letters were long and he really loved talking about Zelda, she's a little older than me, and all the new projects he was working on. My family went to Disney that summer and I wrote a letter while in the car and I was determined to give it to Genie because I was convinced he was always playing him in the costume and wanted to hand deliver at least one. My brother and sister were again deterring me but I wasn't breaking my gait. Well, of all coincidences in the world, Robin actually was there signing autographs. I was ecstatic. Literally jumping for joy as I'm in line. We get to him and I'm rambling like a motherfucker telling him how I was a winner and about the letter and yada yada. He just goes Kyle. With a massive grin and opens his coat and pulls out my letter from a month prior that was with a few others. Apparently he kept all our letters on him while on the road to help cheer himself up, which devastates me now thinking about what that meant. I almost fainted. I cannot express the amount of electric energy surging through me knowing Robin Williams actually wrote me, knew me, and I believe truly loved me and those other kids like we were his children. I'll never ever claim anybody was a bigger fan of his than Zelda. I respect her too much to say that. But I'm definitely his second biggest fan of all time. Does it count if you weren't even alive when they died? Because I got super into Queen, as do most people, and I had known Freddie Mercury has been dead for a long time now, but every time I hear the band's music or his solo music I just kinda have this weird feeling of, damn, he's dead and I'm kinda sad about that. Like, holy shit, he was amazing. His story is interesting and I look up to him so much. I also was seeing and reading interviews where people said he would be insecure about his teeth and would always do this lip bite when he smiled, and I don't know. I related to that so much and made me like him more. When I was younger I did the exact thing and kids would call me Bucktooth, told to not bite my lip when smiling and all sorts of names. It was an ongoing struggle until high school. I thought I was alone, but seeing that someone as fucking amazing as Freddie Mercury went through the same I did. I don't know, I felt better about myself in some strange way. Also, I was listening to We Are the Champions the other day and the part where he sings I consider it a challenge before the human race and I ain't gonna lose. You certainly didn't lose that challenge, Mr. Mercury. What a fucking legend, and now I'm sad. I have no idea where I'm going with this, but damn, I wish I could have been alive when he was around. Surprised how far down this was legit the biggest one for me. Some crazy backstory. My uncle's accountant's son lives in Japan and owns a business exporting cars. He helped to source some stuff for the FF movies. I got connected with him when I was looking for a car for myself. I ended up importing a few to flip anyway. He asked me if I could help deal with a Skyline for a client. He didn't say much about who it was, just explained that it was getting imported to Canada and that some paperwork needed to be dealt with so they could drive it as a Canadian car in the US. I figured sure, why not. Turns out the client is AE Performance, Paul and Roger's company. I met Paul for about 10 minutes when I was dropping the car off. He had the staff at AE put me on the invite list for track days. I never actually made it out. I always figured it'll line up with the time I'm in LA one day, never ended up playing out. To this day, one of my biggest regrets. I can legitimately say he was one of the nicest, coolest people I've ever met. I've only cried from two celebrity deaths, Roger Ebert and Kobe Bryant. When I was a kid, I was both a huge basketball fan and a movie buff. Ebert's reviews really helped me appreciate cinema in a more detailed, nuanced way, and I used to read them every week in my local paper. I wanted to be a director and or critic for quite a while, largely because of him. Kobe was kind of weird because I never really cared for him as a player, and I've especially never liked the Lakers. I found myself bawling about his death last year, and it felt unprecedented, until I remembered my reaction to Ebert's death, and I had an epiphany. I found these two deaths so poignant because they were representative of two of my biggest childhood interests, and were at the zenith of their careers throughout my formative years. I had essentially grown up with those two men, and with their deaths, I think on some level it felt as though integral parts of my childhood were dying as well. Robin Williams. And I have to say, what really hit me wasn't just his death, but the way he died. Freaking suicide, man. And he has always been known as this very warm, pleasant presence on the big screen. Someone who makes you laugh and smile because he seems so warm and familiar. And then you find out he was in so much pain. That the vultures of Hollywood was destroying him inside out, so he at last couldn't see another way out. I will also say a similar thing happened with Stan Lee, though that was the years leading up to his death where all of these horrible stories came out, about how Hollywood just purely exploited him and made his life a living hell in so many ways. This poor old man. So when he finally died, it almost felt like a relief to know that he can now be in peace where Hollywood can't get their grubby fingers on him. What sucks though is how his legacy is now being mistreated and exploited. And believe me, I used to love the MCU and Disney and so on. But the way they treat his works and his fans now are just distasteful. It's very distasteful. I know this will get buried, but it was the death of a famous gay porn star, Eric Rhodes, that affected me the most on a personal level. He died in 2012, and many gay forums and gay news sites were shocked at his passing from an overdose. But what got me was that I discovered his personal Tumblr only weeks before he took his life. I was initially attracted because he's my type, but then started to read his writings. In it he talked about how bleak the future seems due to politics and things beyond his control, climate change, technological isolation, and how empty everything feels now, even things that he used to enjoy on a personal level. I still think about his last Tumblr posts now and again.